Welcome to Bible Study Insights with BibleStudyCam, and I'm BibleStudyCam, and I want to welcome you to this morning's Bible study broadcast or live stream. Whether you're tuning in on Twitter or Periscope at BibleStudyCam, whether you're on Facebook.com/reflective Bible study, whether you're on YouTube at The Online Preacher, or even at theonlinepreacher.com/live, wherever you happen to be tuning in, I want to welcome you to this morning's Bible study. And this morning we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 9, verses 40, the second half of verse 43 to verse 45, that little short 2.5 verse passage. And in this 2.5 verse passage, we discover an amazing challenge that Jesus gives his disciples, and the disciples completely missing an open door opportunity to discover the truth about what would happen on crucifixion weekend. So let's dive into this passage and discover what we can learn that is applicable in our lives today in all the craziness of this world that we're facing right now. Luke chapter 9, we're going to start in the second half of verse 43, and I'm going to read from the New American Standard Bible. But while everyone was marveling at all that he was doing, this is Jesus teaching and preaching and performing miracles and all of that stuff that he was doing that amazed the crowds and brought glory to God. While everyone was marveling at all he was doing, he said to his disciples, "Let these words sink into your ears, for the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." Now, both Matthew and Mark also include this event. And Matthew and Mark include a little bit more detail in these two verses, or in this section of this passage, to describe what delivering into the hands of men meant. And that would be that Jesus would be delivered to be crucified, but that Jesus would also be raised from the dead on the third day. But verse 45, "But they did not understand this statement, and it was concealed from them so they would not perceive it, and they were afraid to ask him about this statement." Now, the reason why I picked Luke's gospel is because of how Luke framed verse 45. Luke gives us more detail into verse 45 than any of the other gospels, either Mark or Matthew, do. And these three reasons for the disciples not pushing forward, not asking the question, are three really relevant things for us to pay attention to. First, it says that they did not understand this statement. Now, it would be easy for someone to arrogantly say, well, yeah, I understand what Jesus was saying here, and it was this, and they might be right. But for the disciples living in that first century, in a culture that had no idea or no real understanding and never really focused on the idea of the Messiah actually suffering and dying, it's completely understandable for the disciples to not understand this statement. And Mark kind of jumps to the conclusion that the last little phrase, which was, they were afraid to ask him about this statement. Not only did the disciples not understand what Jesus was telling them, they were afraid to ask him about it. But Luke includes a third reason, and it's sandwiched in between these two. And Luke says in the middle of verse 45, "And it was concealed from them so that they would not perceive it." Now, the framing in this, the way that this is phrased and framed, prompts me to think that God had closed the disciples' minds to understanding what he was trying to teach them. Which is a little bit odd in my mind, because if God was closing the disciples' minds to what Jesus was wanting to share with them, then why would Jesus even be trying to share with them what he wanted to share them? Jesus really wanted them to not be surprised at crucifixion weekend, to not be surprised at the betrayal, at the arrest, at the crucifixion, and to really be, in some ways, glad, because after the crucifixion, after it looked like death had the upper hand, Jesus wanted his disciples to know that he was going to rise from the grave. Which is amazing, because why would God stop the disciples from perceiving it? Why would he conceal this knowledge from them when Jesus really wanted to share it with them? One answer that I could come up with, or that I have thought, is that Jesus wanted to share with them so that at the end of this event, at the end of Jesus' ministry, after Jesus had died and was buried and rose from the grave, then all of the stuff that Jesus had been trying to tell them beforehand that they just didn't want to admit to, or just weren't paying attention to, or didn't want to accept, all of that stuff would come flooding into their minds saying, Jesus really wanted us to know this, and we were so dense that we didn't, that we just couldn't get it. But in this passage out of Luke, it almost is as though God may have closed the disciples' minds to it. And that challenges me, because I have to ask myself the question, is God closing my mind to something that he would rather me know? Or closing my mind to something that I should know, but maybe now is not the right time? I can't answer the question for me, or even the question for you, but what I do know is that fear, when it says the disciples were afraid to ask him about this statement, fear stopped the disciples from finding out the truth. I believe that they might have not understood, and God might have been hiding the truth from them, but I think that the truth was maybe being hidden from them because God wanted the disciples, and Jesus wanted the disciples to ask the question, to push past their fear, to discover the truth. And I suspect that fear stopped them, like it can so easily stop us from asking God the questions that are on our hearts and on our minds. And in the world as it is today, in the craziness of how life is right now, with us being physically separated from each other and trying to stay connected digitally, and just with all of the stuff that the world is trying to do to slow the spread of this virus, this pandemic that's sweeping across the globe, let's not let fear stop us from taking this time to grow closer to God, to grow our relationship with God, because regardless of whether we're separated from each other physically, we are always connected with God, and God does not want us to stay distant from him. And God doesn't want fear to stop us from asking him the questions he would really want us to ask, so that he can teach us what he wants us to learn, and so that we can grow into the people that he created us to be. That's the big insight, the big challenge that I see in these 2.5 verses that I want to draw our attention to this morning. Let's together not let fear stop us from bringing our questions to God. Remember that right now might not be the right time for an answer, but right now is always the right time to ask the question and to grow towards God. As we together leave the craziness of this world kind of in our peripheral vision, you might say, and focus together past today, past tomorrow, past next week, and onto eternity, onto that adventure that God has for us in the new heaven and new earth, where there won't be any more pain, disease, distancing, physical distancing, social isolating, all of that stuff, where there won't be any of that, where we will be together with God, with each other, in person, together with him, in a new heaven, new earth, where there won't be any more pain, disease, or death. And let's not let fear stop us from moving forward on this journey that can start today. Now, that's what I wanted to share with you, whether you're tuning in at Twitter or Periscope at BibleStudyCam, whether you're on Facebook.com/Reflective Bible Study, whether you're at YouTube at The Online Preacher, or even at theonlinepreacher.com/live, wherever you happen to be tuning into this, whether you're watching this live as I'm saying this, or whether you're on replay, let's together keep our minds and our hearts and our perspectives focused on God. And if you know somebody who would be encouraged by this message, then please share this video with them. Because while we're separated physically, let's stay connected digitally and let's keep encouraging each other with hope. And if there's something in this passage that I didn't bring out that you want to draw our attention to, jump into any one of the chat boxes that you see with this video. I know that if you're on Periscope, then the chat is going to end when the live stream ends. But if you're on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, any one of those places, jump into the chat, and I'll be there right when this live stream ends to connect with you and to keep this conversation going. And so together, while we're separated, let's keep our minds and our hearts and our perspectives focused on Jesus. And thanks for tuning in today. And I'll be back tomorrow with another passage and another insight as we together move towards eternity.